Welcome. Today, we're taking a crucial deep dive into one of the most intense, really complex conflicts of our time, the Gaza war. This isn't just about the headlines you see every day. It's about trying to understand the deep currents shaping the region and impacting so many lives.
Exactly. Our mission today is really to unpack the many layers of this conflict. We're drawing insights from quite a few comprehensive sources, things like recent Wikipedia excerpts, but also in-depth analyses from places like the Wilson Center and OPB-NPR.
Right. And our goal is to try and pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge, the key insights, basically offering you a shortcut to being genuinely well-informed on this. We'll navigate the origins of this latest phase, the really devastating human cost, the very complex ceasefire talks, and these radically different ideas for what happens next. So when you put it all together, what does it actually mean for Gaza's future and, the whole region? Let's try and explore these layers.
Okay, so to really get a handle on the present, we have to go back to the catalyst. October 2023. That Hamas-led attack on Israel, October 7th. It was widely described as, an intelligence failure for the ages for Israel. Observers pointed to just extraordinary levels of operational security from Hamas in their planning.
And the scale of it was just, staggering. The Economist noted it dwarfed all other mass murders of Israeli civilians. They made that chilling point that the last time before October 7th that this many Jews were murdered on a single day was during the Holocaust. The sources put the number at 1,195 Israelis killed, over 800 of them civilians. So this wasn't just an attack. Its sheer scale, that historical echo, it immediately reset everything for Israel. A massive response was inevitable.
That's a critical point. According to observers, and Hamas officials themselves actually, this was a calculated move by Hamas. The goal apparently was to create a permanent state of war, and from their perspective, sort of revive the Palestinian cause. A strategic calculation, really.
Okay, so given that attack, what was Israel's immediate stated response? How did they frame it?
Right after October 7th, Prime Minister Netanyahu declared the country was at war. Full stop. He used strong language, threatening to turn all the places where Hamas is organized and hiding into cities of ruins, calling Gaza the city of evil, and actually urging residents there to leave.
Yeah, the response was definitely swift and forceful. Israel's security cabinet voted pretty quickly to destroy the military and governmental capabilities of both Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. And some initial actions really hit hard, cutting off 80% of Gaza's electricity supply. That has an immediate, huge impact on civilians.
And that was just the start. A big ground incursion into northern Gaza kicked off around October 27th. There were specific strikes reported near places like Al-Quds Hospital, which sources said was sheltering something like 14,000 civilians at the time. Another one, the strike on Jabalia refugee camp report said 50 killed, 150 wounded. Israel's statement on that was that they were targeting a senior Hamas commander and dozens of militants.
So after that really intense initial phase, the conflict kind of shifted, didn't it, into this cycle of attempted ceasefires and then, renewed fighting. There were several efforts, but they just kept struggling to actually hold. The first notable truce attempt was back in November 2023.
That's right. Qatar helped broker that one. It went into effect November 24th. During that pause, Hamas exchanged some hostages for Palestinian prisoners held by Israel. But what's really interesting, or maybe telling, is that during that truce, Israel actually arrested almost as many Palestinians as it released. It just highlights the tension, even during a pause.
And predictably, perhaps, that truce didn't last long. It expired December 1st. And, both sides were quick to blame the other for why it couldn't be extended.
So December 23, January 24, the fighting was really intense again, especially down in Khan Yunis. By January, the IDF, the Israeli forces, had pulled back from North Gaza, but then reports started coming out that Hamas had significantly rebuilt its fighting strengths right back in that same area, which, makes you question the long-term impact of these withdrawals if capabilities just bounce back.
January 22nd was a really grim day, too. Became the deadliest day for the IDF since the whole ground operation began. 24 soldiers killed. And then there was that story that got a lot of attention internationally, the killing of 5-year-old Hind Rajab and her family. The audio of her phone call that really sparked international outrage. It just brought home the human tragedy happening amidst it all.
Which brings us to the second major ceasefire attempt. This one started in January 2025, lasted into March. An agreement was announced January 15th, took effect the 19th, again with Qatar mediating.
Okay, and the idea here was Hamas releases hostages, Israel releases Hamas militants and other Palestinian prisoners, but then it hit a snag, right? By late February, Hamas had released 6 hostages, but Israel then refused to release 600 Palestinian prisoners. Netanyahu reportedly objected, calling it the use of hostages for propaganda. You can see how the prisoner exchange got tangled up in the politics.
Yeah, and Hamas did pause releases for a bit. Around February 10th, they cited Israeli violations, but then they seemed to resume. The real breakdown, though, was Phase 2. Those negotiations were supposed to start in February, cover all the remaining hostages, Israeli withdrawal, and, crucially, a permanent end to the war. They just never happened.
So why? What was the reason given for that critical failure?
Well, on March 1st, Hamas rejected an Israeli proposal just to extend Phase 1. And on the Israeli side, Netanyahu's government flat out refused to even enter Phase 2 talks. They stated their goal was to keep fighting as long as Hamas is in charge. So you got these really hardened positions on both sides, leading to, well, another escalation. Indeed. Israel then blocked all aid getting into Gaza from March 2nd. They framed it as pressure on Hamas for new terms. But mediators and others condemned it, calling it a ceasefire violation and collective punishment. It just made the humanitarian situation even worse.
Stepping back a bit from the day-to-day fighting, one of the biggest problems here, maybe the biggest, is these completely different goals, the profoundly different objectives, as one source put it, of everyone involved. That source noted this fundamental clash creates a highly unstable environment. It makes any kind of sustainable plan just exceedingly difficult.
Which naturally leads us to look at these conflicting visions for what Gaza's future should even look like. Let's start with the Trump-Gaza proposal from February 2025. This is pretty controversial. It suggested displacing Gaza's Palestinian population, sending them to neighboring Arab countries. He apparently repeated this idea several times.
Yeah, and it went further. It proposed a U.S. takeover of Gaza, having world people live there, and making neighboring countries pay for rebuilding. Initially, he didn't rule out U.S. troops, though I think some of that was walked back later. Unsurprisingly, Jordan and the Arab League just rejected it immediately. It shows how sensitive that whole idea of displacement is in the region.
Right. But it was praised by Israel's far-right national security minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir. He called it the only solution. And it's interesting, Netanyahu and Ben-Gvir framed it as voluntary migration, but another minister, Shlomo Karhi, apparently said it would be forced rather than voluntary, so different messages there. Trump himself then rejected the Arab League's counterproposal later on, so clear disagreement.
Okay, so what was that Arab League alternative then?
So the Arab League met in March 2025. They put forward a pretty substantial plan, $53 billion for Gaza's reconstruction, but crucially, their plan explicitly kept the population in Gaza. It also had conditions. Hamas had to disarm, step down from power, and it called for new elections for a reformed Palestinian Authority.
But that plan also hit a wall. Hamas rejected it, saying their arms were non-negotiable. It just wouldn't accept disarmament. So you have these plans, both rejected. Where does that leave U.S. diplomatic efforts in this stalemate?
Well, the U.S. Special Envoy, Steve Witkoff, proposed a 60-day truce. It included freeing 28 hostages in exchange for over 1,000 Palestinian prisoners, plus humanitarian aid. Israel apparently accepted this deal, but Hamas came back asking for changes, specifically demanding a complete withdrawal of the IDF from Gaza. It just shows that fundamental gap again.
The U.S. also threw in another condition, demanding the immediate release of a specific U.S.-Israeli citizen, Eden Alexander, for any extended ceasefire. Hamas offered to release him, plus the bodies of 4 other dual nationals, but the U.S. and Israel said no, it didn't match their proposal's terms.
So you look at all these attempts, and the bottom line, the core stumbling block, it just seems to be this persistent clash. Israel insists, hostages released now. Hamas insists, permanent ceasefire, IDF completely out of Gaza, until there's some way to bridge that gap. Well, this stalemate just continues.
And while the diplomacy stalls, the human cost, it's just devastating. We have to talk about the numbers. By June 2024, reports indicated over 57,000 Palestinians in Gaza killed, over half women and children, more than 135,000 injured. Just staggering figures.
Yeah, and a Lancet study estimated maybe even higher numbers from traumatic injuries alone, 64,260 by June 24. And they noted the real toll could be larger when you factor in indirect deaths, people dying from lack of medical care, disease, starvation. Beyond the deaths, the destruction caused by Israel is described as unprecedented. Entire cities just flattened, vital infrastructure gone.
We're talking hospitals, even children's hospitals, farmland, religious sites, cultural landmarks, schools, universities, cemeteries wiped out. Over 168,000 buildings damaged or destroyed. And to give you a sense of the scale of rebuilding needed, the environmental impact alone is estimated at potentially 60 million tons of CO2 equivalent. That's like the annual emissions of Portugal or Sweden just from reconstruction. It's huge.
And the humanitarian crisis on top of that is just dire. It keeps getting worse. The Titan blockade led to severe hunger. There was still a high risk of famine persisting as of May 2025. Aid is barely trickling in, maybe 100 trucks a day compared to over 600 before the blockade. The whole aid system is described as being near collapse.
And what's really concerning is reports of aid convoys being looted, sometimes even in areas supposedly under Israeli control. It just makes delivering aid even harder. Then there's the displacement. Heartbreaking numbers. Nearly the entire population of Gaza, 2.3 million Palestinians, forcibly displaced. And on the Israeli side, over 100,000 Israelis were internally displaced at the conflict's peak as well.
And this hasn't stayed contained, has it? It's spilled over significantly into the region. We've seen a major escalation in Israel-Iran tensions, Iranian-backed groups, the Houthis in Yemen, Hezbollah in Lebanon launching attacks. It destabilizes the whole area.
And the U.S. role, significant military, financial, diplomatic support for Israel. They deployed 100 U.S. soldiers for a THAAD anti-air system that's a sophisticated missile defense, piloting drones over Gaza for intelligence gathering. The U.S. also carried out airstrikes against Houthi targets in Yemen, so direct U.S. military involvement in related conflicts, too.
All of this naturally raises very serious questions about reactions on the ground and these allegations of war crimes. Within Gaza itself, there were actually protests against Hamas in March 2025. Hundreds, maybe thousands of Palestinians. They were citing war weariness, anger over alleged misuse of aid, suppression of speech, abuse of civilians. Show significant internal discontent.
And on the Israeli side, public opinion seems quite hardline, based on some polls. A March 2025 poll found 82% of Israeli Jews supported the forced expulsion of Gaza residents, and almost half, 47%, believed the IDF should kill all its inhabitants when conquering an enemy city, like the biblical story of Joshua and Jericho. Stark views.
Internationally, the reaction has been strong too. Major human rights groups, Amnesty, Human Rights Watch, and a UN independent commission have put out reports. They've concluded Israel is committing genocide or genocidal acts in Gaza, citing things like intentional deprivation of essentials like water, destruction of health care, extremely serious charges.
And it's important to note the International Criminal Court, the ICC prosecutor, has sought arrest warrants for both Prime Minister Netanyahu and Hamas leaders. So scrutiny on both sides at that level. Israel, for its part, has strongly condemned all these reports and allegations. They call them false and absurd, vigorously denying the claims.
So, okay, we've covered a lot of ground. When we try to bring all these different threads together, what's the picture that emerges from this deep dive?
Well, we've definitely navigated the profound complexities of this war. From those initial devastating attacks and the counter-operations, through the fragile ceasefires that kept breaking down, to these completely opposing visions for what comes after. It's undeniably a conflict defined by just immense human suffering and these really deep-seated conflicting goals. We've looked at the desperate search for peace, the grim realities people are facing, and how this ripples out internationally.
So given where things stand now, this stalemate, where the core demands on each side seem frankly irreconcilable, and you look at the sheer scale of destruction, the human displacement, what realistic path forward actually remains?
Yeah, that's the question, isn't it? Can a sustainable future for both peoples ever be built amid such deep, persistent division? Or is this tragic cycle of conflict just destined to repeat? What stands out to you listening to all this as the single most critical challenge we've unpacked today? Something to really think about?